Nice try. Thank you. If you could please take your seats, start enjoying your delicious lunches, and we will have also a very enriching conversation coming your way shortly. I'm Jackie Miller, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Seattle, and also a board member here with the WACA National Board. You are here at the lunch keynote where we are going to talk about where challenge meets change. And I think WACA put this session together because some of the most vexing challenges of the 21st century, and we've certainly been hearing a lot about them already today, concern this really complex intersection of development, of security, health, climate, economics, et cetera, et cetera. So for the next hour, we're going to look at development tools that the US government has and how they are addressing these really complex challenges in a way that benefit all stakeholders. And in case you're not sure, you are a stakeholder in US foreign assistance outcomes. And a lot of what we've been talking about so far today at the conference, and we'll be talking about going forward, it's kind of heavy, dark, maybe even depressing. And I'm not suggesting that development work is not challenging, because it is, and the stakes are really high. But I think you're going to find this session a bit refreshing because you're going to leave with some optimism. And I think we could all use some optimism after some of what we've been hearing today. There's still a lot of work to do and a lot of needs that need to be addressed, but there is good news in the world of US foreign assistance. So it is my pleasure to introduce Chidi Blyden, who is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And if you're not sure what role the MCC plays in the US development assistance toolbox and how it contributes to reducing poverty through economic growth, you will leave today with a better understanding of that. Chidi has 15 years of government service. Before joining the Millennium Challenge Corporation, she was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for African Affairs. She had also previously served in the Defense Department in the Obama administration. And she was a professional staff member of the House Armed Services Committee, working with my representative, Adam Smith. She has also worked in academia, in the nonprofit sector, so she brings an incredibly rich perspective informed by service across sectors and a very deep experience in Africa. So please join me in welcoming Chidi Blyden to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Jackie told me that I was going to have a full house, and I figured it's because it's lunchtime. No one is going to skip lunch, and therefore you will have to hear us drone on a little bit about the optimism of development. So thank you all for being here. It's quite a pleasure to join you all for this conversation on the complex challenges facing the development community right now. And I want to just give a really special thank you to the World Affairs Council for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to enlighten you on MCC's work and how it meets the themes of this year's conference of seeing from the other side, and as Jackie mentioned, tackling complex challenges. As the last few months have shown, it's no secret that we are at an important moment when it comes to building a path forward for democracies around the globe. In order for good governance to thrive, we must lay a foundation that is resilient to the shocks that threaten the stability of our future. If this morning's conversations are any indication of the breadth of knowledge in this room, I would just want to share with you all how glad I am to be amongst you all to continue this conversation. Whether it be global health, the climate crisis, the digital climate, or anything else, it is incumbent upon all of us in the development community to work together to find solutions that are efficient, effective, and enduring. The United States government is committed to doing just that. It is in our national interest to make the US an attractive partner to the countries that are pursuing sustainable economic development. It is especially vital in these challenging times that US government support nations that are recovering from exogenous threats like health and climate shocks, because development is crucial to the prosperity of people across the globe. The US government has many tools in its development toolbox to do this important work, but I'm especially proud of one of them, and I may be biased, but the Millennium Challenge Corporation, or MCC, where I currently serve as the Deputy CEO, I think is one of the premier examples of how development can work. For those of you who may be less familiar, MCC is a government agency that just this year celebrated its 20th year of bipartisan support. Our model allows us to be selective, choosing to work only with well-governed democracies that have a commitment to ruling justly, supporting economic freedom, and investing in their people. And over the past 2 decades, we've made an outsized impact in comparison to our size. In fact, we expect that our investments have uplifted nearly 500 million people globally. That's roughly 1 out of every 16 people on the planet whose lives have been touched by our small but mighty organization. And we've done it in an innovative way by investing with grants instead of loans. This allows us to be attractive partners of choice who will not contribute to the debt burden of the countries facing the very challenges we've been discussing today. That's how we've built such a diverse portfolio across continents, sectors, and program size. I'm very fortunate to work at an organization that has touched the lives of so many people, from the school children in the Philippines who are able to focus on classroom outcomes instead of grumbling stomachs because we've helped tackle food and nutrition insecurity, to the growing workforce in Guatemala that's better prepared to engage with the 21st century economy due to training programs that we've established, to the women who are in Lesotho who are for the first time able to hold land rights to use for their own businesses and beyond. Because at MCC, we truly do aim to be transformative. And it's special for one simple reason. It's special because it works. This past year hasn't just been a celebration for us at MCC. It's been a time to reflect on what works and on rare occasion, what doesn't. The good news is a lot of what MCC does, we do well. We recently released our capstone document, a strategic review of the agency, which dives deep into our history and also outlines our path forward. It discusses our commitment to reinforcing MCC's model, broadening MCC's investment approach, strengthening systems and institutions, and equipping MCC staff with the tools to meet the needs of the future. These pillars will guide us going forward, and I highly recommend that you check it out because it's a great resource for all of us in the development community, and it tells our story by us and our partners. And just as our community faces challenges, so does MCC. For one, we know that we could do more with more. That's why we hope to soon reform our country candidate pool so that we can continue our work in additional countries around the world. I know today is meant to focus on challenges, and yes, we do face many. But before we dive into the questions, I want to just say that from challenges grow opportunities. Today and every day that lies ahead, we are distinctively positioned to pave the path for a better future. The development community, this development community of people from government, academia, finance, and the private sectors here in this room today, were comprised of unique perspectives and diverse skill sets. It's a beautiful thing that we are united by a shared belief that change is not only possible, but it is necessary. So we're going to make that change together, and we're going to start right now. So let's get the conversation started. As Jackie said, we're here for optimism and lunch. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Chidi. So I was furiously taking notes during your remarks. I want to do a deeper dive into some of those things that you brought up for a bit more clarity, a bit more insight. As you noted, it's MCC's 20th birthday. Happy birthday. So, what's your biggest takeaway from those first 20 years? I mean, okay, yeah, you mentioned touching 1 out of 16 people on the planet. That's pretty good. Yeah. But what else you got?
I mean, look around you. Every 2 tables has been touched by MCC in some way. But I think, it goes back to what I was saying about MCC being a model that works. And with 20 years of proven impact, I think MCC is ready to scale up. We've learned that as global challenges evolve, we must go broader to bring MCC's tool to bear in more places around the world. And we're pursuing legislation for an expansion of our candidate pool, as I mentioned in my remarks, to bring MCC's model to more places for even greater impact. I think we've been seeking opportunities opportunities to invest in solutions for cross-border issues through regional compacts, but we've also learned that you can have not just infrastructure projects, which is most people know us for our compacts, but there's also the ability to be able to change institutional reforms, policies, and the impacts that governance can have on democracy so that they can deliver for their people. I think beyond where we work, we are also committed to supporting the creation of resilient and inclusive economies. This includes investing in young people and women's technical education and promoting climate-smart initiatives. Additionally, we have a rich track record of collaborating with governments, civil society, organizations, and communities worldwide to combat poverty and create better environments to serve the population. So we've learned quite a bit. We've learned that what we do works. This, model that we have been able to sort of refine and evolve over 20 years, I think is just at the beginning of learning what it can actually do, should it be given more of an opportunity. In my remarks I mentioned, Lesotho, and I want to just give an example of what MCC's learned over the years. We did a compact with MCC, a compact with Lesotho, very early on in our years. I think it was in 2005, in the first or second year. But this compact was a health and horticulture compact back then. It helped to digitize the health sector, it helped to provide clinics in rural parts of the country, and then allowed for there to be better access for healthcare across the country. This time, we're going back in and we're building off of that success. We obviously left a foundation of people who know how we work, who know the impact that can happen if you are involving multiple communities and really stretching the dollars that you have to do the work that you do, that we were able to use our credibility to work with the government to make some legal reforms that they had been struggling to do for a long time. And it's really simple. We were able to show them that in the Land Reform Act for Women that they had been already working on, if you gave 50% more of your population, women, access to land, you can have 50% more output from your agriculture sector, which means 50% more to go to market, to go to sell, to go to trade. And when we were able to give them that economic aspect of things, it changed the conversation from just being about, oh, we're here doing some good work because it's good for people. It's here to change the economy. And that type of transformative impact and work that we've been able to do, for me, is 20 years worth the wait.
So a couple points there I definitely want to come back to, expanding the candidate pool and kind of the gender lens of MCC's work. But there's something pretty unique, I think, about MCC, especially in this day and age. The 20 years of MCC's work has also been characterized by strong, consistent bipartisan support. And when bipartisanship is such a challenging concept these days, and not all U.S. foreign assistance tools enjoy that broad bipartisan support. Can you kind of unpack that a bit for us? Maybe go a bit into MCC's origin story.
Sure.
But why has MCC been able to keep really strong bipartisan support, which is so crucial to funding the work? And given the political climate, the really unsettled political climate that we're in right now, do you expect that MCC will be able to continue to tap into that strong bipartisan support?
I think that's a great question, and I appreciate you saying in my bio that I've been 15 years of government service. If people start to add that up, you'll start to guess my age. But I first came to Washington in the Bush administration, and it was a large focus, I think, at that time to really think about what the U.S. wanted its reputation to be across the world. And so we were in a number of different places, doing different things. We were using different tools in our foreign policy toolkit. And MCC was really born out of that bipartisan sort of, let's put our heads together and figure out how we can work across the world to not just, as I said earlier, do development work, but do development work that can have an economic output. And so we were formed in bipartisan support since our founding, and this strong support has continued today as we continue to just think about what kind of impact the United States can have in the world. Evidence of MCC's continued ability to tap into bipartisan support can be seen in our candidate country pool bill. This was something that was done across both aisles. Both of them were able to see the impact of using U.S. foreign policy assistance to be able to get at a better, safer, more secure world to help improve, and make more prosperous societies. And I think we've been able to bring that argument back to the United States that a more prosperous world means for, a safer United States. And that, I think, resonates on both sides of the aisle, and I think we'll continue to enjoy that type of support. MCC's FY25 budget remains steady in a very difficult budget environment. As we talk about difficult environments, it's very difficult to get, foreign assistance dollars that are consistent. And I think that is a testament to our ability to be able to show actual results to both sides of the aisle about what MCC is able to do. And so I have a lot of optimism, it's no surprise, that we will be able to continue that support. And I think being able to demonstrably show our continued impact will play a key role in that as well.
So if we can stay on one of the points you just made, and you also, it came up in your remarks, and that's about, prosperity of people across the globe. So MCC is one tool in the development toolkit to support nations recovering from some of the exogenous shocks. You mentioned climate shocks and health shocks. And because you said development is critical to the prosperity of people across the globe, can you unpack for us a bit more why is raising the prosperity of people in Lesotho, for example, why is that in U.S. national interest? Why should that be a U.S. foreign policy priority?
I mean, so I can have a career. For all those aspiring national security professionals, it is critical, I think, to our U.S. national security toolkit. I think development is integral to U.S. national security in any conversation, but I think directly supporting global stability, economic prosperity, and strategic partnerships allows us to be stronger as a nation, but also helps our partners grow themselves into being part of the larger global and national security ecosystem that the world can enjoy for stability. I think promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth globally strengthens U.S. partnerships and creates a more resilient global economy, which in turn benefits U.S. citizens. MCC has been able to play a really crucial role in this, in advancing these objectives by supporting poverty reduction through economic growth. And as you noted, we have other tools in our toolkits. There's obviously military toolkits. We have our partners at USAID who are working from another perspective and looking at things from an institutional perspective for governance or humanitarian assistance. We also have, trade and other and things that we do. But I think what MCC has been able to do is align its development efforts with U.S. foreign policy goals, trying to help create a more secure and prosperous world by reducing poverty through economic growth. And that's a really specific thing because we work with low to middle income countries who may be at the very bottom of the radar when it comes to what actually needs to be done to bring those countries up to being part of the larger global economy, as I mentioned. MCC also has a model that is flexible, and its high-quality grant assistance is distinct from other U.S. development agencies. We make sure that we focus on country ownership, evidence-based decision-making, and transparent results that drive our projects. And as one of the largest sources of U.S. development finance in our toolkit, MCC's model emphasizes mutual accountability and inclusive partnerships, ensuring effective use of taxpayer dollars. So kind of getting back to that bipartisan support as well, it's critical for us to be able to account for every single dollar that goes out the door, and in the interest of not just the national security, but I think also our U.S. taxpayer dollars. So I think, I heard some elements of this morning when I sat into the breakfast session. In a competitive global environment, our commitment from a U.S. perspective on long-term sustainable development provides a valuable opportunity for the U.S. global leadership by fostering stable partners abroad. And that's something that I can say, I think with a little bit of my experience, that not all of our international partners do.
I think we might come back to that. Okay. But first, I want to follow up on a session that we had this morning on gender equality, or lack thereof, where the panelists mentioned that women globally enjoy 3/4 of the rights of men, but that there is a virtuous circle of legal reforms and positive outcomes. Mm-hmm. And the moderator said gender equality is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And we know that investing in the education and empowerment of women and girls is really imperative for inclusive economic growth and for prosperity globally. So how does the MCC, or does the MCC consistently incorporate a gender lens into its investments? And you talked about Lesotho, but can you maybe give us some feel-good examples of where MCC's focus on investment with a gender lens has led to positive outcomes, has contributed to this virtuous circle?
Absolutely. I mentioned in my remarks earlier about MCC at 20, our strategic capstone, which has been a review of what we've been working on over the last 20 years, and just taking those lessons learned and putting them into one document that just shares that story. And one of the key components of putting this strategy or this review document together was to pull together all of the things that MCC has found important over the years. And one of those was our gender and social inclusion strategy. We took time to write one years ago, and this year we've done work to revamp it, to make it sure that it was a bit more inclusive, to not just include gender aspects and women, but also to make sure that it includes youth, marginalized groups, that we have seen and through our work over the last 20 years. I think we have always made sure that compacts have had, at the fundamental sort of development process with the country, an element of gender, social inclusion, inclusion of marginalized groups. And so it's part of our due diligence process, but it's also a part of our program development process. So it's always been integral to our work. I think that we've recognized over the years, as I gave in the Lesotho example, that growth alone will not meet the poverty reduction rates that we're trying to achieve in the development community. And so not being inclusive and not being sustainable is where we wanted to try and make the biggest impact with our strategy. Our strategy provides guidance on how to better reflect our agency's learning and best practices in gender and social inclusion, but you asked about some examples of where we have actually seen this work. And I've been really excited, obviously, about the work that we've been able to do in Africa. But I think what we have tried to instill in each of the programs is a structural element of routinely and systematically targeting those groups that are not regularly thought about when we do our program development. On top of that, I think we've done a good job of coordinating with other agencies, such as the Department of State, to make sure that considerations like counter-trafficking and trafficking in persons reports are an element that we take into account when we're thinking about what the output of a road could be or any other infrastructure project that we could do might have an impact on the gender and social inclusion aspect of it. One that comes to mind as an example is in Senegal. We've been working on our Senegal Compact, and we've been able to expand access to electricity to an additional 350 villages in Senegal that didn't have access to electricity. And that has meant that we've had to really move into the southern and central regions of Senegal, not the main cities and not maybe the most urban centers, which are home to very high poverty and unemployment rates. So that deliberate intentionality around going to those places where not the average development organization would go is going to show, at the end of the project, that the access that we've been able to provide to electricity will there in turn spurn additional economic returns.
Actually, I'm going to ask if we can just back up real quickly and do an MC 101. And
Yeah.
you mentioned compacts a couple of times. So maybe explain what an MCC compact is.
Absolutely. So apologies. I ran through sort of an MCC 101 in my remarks and trying to keep on time. But compacts for the Millennium Challenge Corporation are large infrastructure projects that we develop with a particular country that can have some sort of transformative change to help reduce poverty in a particular country. The example that I always like to give of this is Mozambique. Right now we're working on a Mozambique compact where we are building a bridge that will connect the northern part of Mozambique to the southern part of Mozambique. Right now, to do trade in Mozambique, if you're in the south, you've got to leave your country, go to another country to come back just because there is no connective tissue in the way of a bridge or some sort of railway line that allows you to be able to trade with the north and the south. And so our compacts projects are normally between, I would say, maybe 250 million to up to about 500 million. We've had some as high as $768 million that have done something of a infrastructure project of that magnitude to really bring together a country's ability to be able to have economic growth. The threshold programs, on the other hand, are something that came a little bit later in our history, when we started to realize that there were countries that were maybe just on the cusp of passing our scorecard, and they just needed a little bit of help in one of the scorecard indicators to help push them over the hurdle so that they could get this infrastructure project. But what they needed to focus on was maybe policy or an institutional reform that would allow them to be able to meet the scorecard requirements of countering corruption, rule of law, and delivering for their people in democracies. And so we have smaller programs that we work with countries. They run anywhere between 20 million to maybe about 50 million. The highest we've had is Kenya is working on a transportation urban planning threshold right now at about 60 million. But it's designed to be able to work with the country to adjust their policies and institutional reforms to be able to unlock the economic potential that may be keeping them from their full potential.
And so maybe just one more little tiny bit of 101 before
Sure.
we move on, which is also, I think, another place where MCC differs from other organizations. So you mentioned the scorecard, and MCC is not just working with countries in need, but there are some very specific requirements. Can you maybe just talk about those really briefly?
Absolutely. Every year we release our scorecards, which has 20 indicators, and one of the requirements for even being considered for a compact is that you must pass 10 of the 20, and each of the indicators on there speaks to a different element of, I would say, progress of a democracy. Girls' education, control of corruption, tax and trade reform laws, education, health. And once you've kind of looked at the scorecard, you get a sense of whether or not a country is able to take on a project of that magnitude, as I've just described, to be able to unlock something. It's a competition every year. We really only work with low to middle income countries and countries where we feel like we can have, as I said, a transformative project. But we also only work, as I said, very selectively with countries who want to make a change in their countries. And so we're able to use the scorecard as one sort of element of understanding whether or not this is a democracy that is really trying to deliver for its people and maybe just needs a little bit of help. But that scorecard is a culmination of data that we pull from the World Bank, Freedom House, a number of different organizations that are looking at different, political freedoms, information freedoms, and their ability to be able to deliver for their people.
So we've got this scorecard measure that countries have to meet to get the 5-year compacts?
5-year compacts. They are time-bound.
Investment from the MCC. What happens if a country backslides?
Yeah, so you might have heard there has been a little bit of a challenge to democracy over the last few years in some parts of the world where we work quite a bit. And it's a very deliberative process that we go through. So part of being able to not just pass the scorecard is that you continue to stay eligible for your compact years beyond the time that you've been selected for an MCC program. And that means that you have to continue, whether it's across the administration that maybe signed the compact into an administration that maybe adopted the compact, you have to continue to be able to show that you're delivering for your people. In the case where we have some backsliding, we do try to work with the countries to ensure that there is steps that are being taken to actually either make some of the reforms that could allow them to continue to be eligible for the program. But we've had cases where if you do not meet the scorecard and you are not eligible based on things that we're seeing happening in a particular country, there's a series of conversations that we have with the country. But we have had to pull compacts in several countries due to not being able to get back on the right track. And I think probably the most prominent examples of this is where we've seen maybe autocratic or military governments come in and try to take over. These are clear signs that this is not a government that is working towards democracy and may not be working in the same elements of how MCC's programs are done.
Well, thank you for that quick MCC primer. I think that will help a bit
Absolutely.
with building on. But now I'm going to focus not just on MCC. I want to bring in your very deep expertise. And I want to turn to Africa, where a majority of MCC investments are. And again, you have a deep background there with the Department of Defense work and nonprofit work as well. The African continent is increasingly important to the United States and globally for the global security, for the global economy, and the United States has very diverse interests across the continent. We're talking economics, politics, global health, development, counterterrorism, and we've got like just throwing great power competition for funsies while we're there. So how does the U.S. think about all of these different objectives? Are they distinct or are they kind of mutually reinforcing in how we address the continent? And I'm sorry, I think this is like 20 questions already. How do we do all the things that we need to do to advance our interests in a continent of 54 very different countries with different challenges and different opportunities, while you've got China and Russia getting all up in there as well?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, let me start with the last part, which I think you really hit the nail on the head on that one. And for me, as somebody who has worked Africa policy in Washington for the majority of my career, you first, as you noted, have to think about the 54 diverse countries with different challenges and different opportunities. It's 54 countries. It's like we don't talk about the Europe and say that we're going to go and help the Europe in the way that, unfortunately, we still sort of think about Africa in that way. And so, U.S. institutions, in my mind, still fall short when they talk about developing programs for Africa, and I use air quotes in that case, rather than thinking about the continent as 54 unique opportunities and governments. And I think that kind of talks to how the institutions are set up, programs are set up, and then resources are allocated, and so that in itself is a little bit of a challenge. When I first came to Washington during the Bush administration, there was already new thought about the importance of Africa, though, and to U.S. national security and what Africa meant to our foreign policy. And as you may recall, there was a 3D philosophy that was placed into the sphere: defense, diplomacy, and development at the core of our foreign policy towards the continent at this time. And these three tools, in my mind, and I think the way it was developed by those who developed it, mutually enforced each other, and organizations such as the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the U.S. Africa Command, the regional strategic centers that have been set up at the National Defense University and elsewhere, were stood up and established to try and address these challenges and the interdisciplinary nature of it. So these organizations also had unique leadership structures. They drew upon the 3Ds and had leadership from USAID, the Department of State, the Department of Defense. I think because at the time, and it's still today, there was an understanding of the symbiotic relationship between these different organizations and how they could actually work. I don't think that has changed much. But I think the employment of it, or the implementation of it, is where we've maybe gotten a little bit challenged. And so maybe I would contend that we need to maybe go back to that, just because I think we've learned over the years that while in East Africa you could be dealing with an issue of terrorism, these institutions that have been set up have not been set up to only handle one or two issues. And so you have a defense solution in terrorism in East Africa, but you've got food insecurity happening in Southern Africa that really requires a development solution. And so how do you get the multitude of, agencies in the U.S. government foreign policy toolkit to work together to try and solve these different things across the continent? I think our U.S. foreign policy and the resources also need to be a little bit more flexible. I know that my USAID colleagues have challenges with earmarks and things that don't allow them to step outside of their boundaries and be flexible when the situation of the complex challenge may change. I think MCC has been very lucky to be able to respond to the types of unique challenges that come about, because we are not designed in a way to only address one particular issue. We go in and we work with the country to find out what the problem is, and with challenge being our middle name, we address the challenge based on what we understand it to be. And so I think these development tools bring a combination of policy, institutional strengthening, infrastructure, financing, and reduction of poverty through economic growth. to the partners that we work with, just as they have long-term benefits for U.S. national interests. So, in Africa, I could give you lots of examples of where, MCC has 2/3 of its programs in Africa. So we have worked across the continent in a number of different ways, from doing, the health and horticulture in Lesotho, doing transmission lines, doing power sector reformation in, West Africa. We're actually working right now with the ECOWAS states to be able to work on the West African power pool with Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria. So working with multilateral institutions, each different sort of area is going to require its own solution. I may be biased, but I think a prosperous Africa means a very prosperous world. And if there was anything I would end on, I would say that I take this from the U.S. Sub-Saharan strategy. The continent will be home to 1/4 of the world's population by 2050, and it hosts vast natural resources, including the world's second largest rainforest and 30% of the critical minerals that power our modern world. It's situated along major sea lines of communication and trade in the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and the Gulf of Aden. So to me, Africa's prosperity is global prosperity, and I say this about Africa, and no matter where I've worked, every one of my staff can tell you that if Africa doesn't win, nobody wins. So how do we break that down? And I think, as I said, country challenges, think of them as country challenges. Then maybe think of them as regional considerations, and then think of them as continental understandings, and then maybe moving to a sort of a global example.
So where in Africa do you think we've got it right in terms of policies? And it's okay to say nowhere.
Well, maybe before I launch into that, I just came from an investment management committee on Tanzania, and I told them that I was going to share this example. I didn't know where I was going to share it, but I was just like, I'm going to share this example. But in order to be able to even think about where we've gotten it right, I'm always really disappointed that we don't have enough academic institutions that focus on Africa policy, national security interests as they relate to the US and as they relate to the world. I'm regularly called to go and talk on this issue, from the Harvards to the Stanfords, and I always find it so surprising that we expect that we will have a next generation of foreign policy professionals who don't know anything about Africa, and then will try to employ solutions on that. So for those of you who are here from the academic community, if your institution does not have an Africa security or policy or development course, not an economics course, there's always an economics course, doesn't have a course like that, I really implore you to talk to your institutions about how that would be integrated, because that is just, that's where the future is going. Again, I may be biased. But just having come from this meeting on Tanzania, we were talking about the policy and institutional reforms that Tanzania has developed in its own national plan, but also wants to make additional reforms to be able to increase the amount of trade that it's doing with the rest of the world, but also within Tanzania and on the continent itself. And the process that MCC has gone through to understand what is actually needed, from digitization to being able to relieve trade barriers, to be able to coordinate with other sectors and institutions within their own government, as well as with like-minded or partners on the continent and internationally, really gets to the breadth of what a geopolitical issue trade can be for a country, and how could be one thing that needs to unlock their potential to be able to be more global. And so we're hoping that in the threshold program that we'll work on, we'll be able to work with them to increase their trade, which will therefore increase their economic viability, and then also allow them to become better integrated into the world. And so to me, I think we all know that Africa is a geopolitical and strategic competition site in space, and Tanzania is not absent from being a part of that. And so it really brings together, I think, how is the U.S. foreign policy going to address this? Maybe it's the tool using MCC that will show them this is how you can better strengthen your institutions, but also strengthen your trade ability, while also being actively in a competition with others who want to see the prosperity of Tanzania, but maybe using a different model.
Well, let's let's talk about those different models. We've talked about great power competition. I think something in your remarks was a reference to China. So I'm going to ask about China specifically. Can you talk about how China uses foreign assistance to exert influence and contrast what you at the MCC is doing with what China is doing, and to make it a tripartite question? What do you hope, you talked also in your remarks about being the partner of choice. So what do you hope countries are taking away from the MCC's approach, the US's approach, versus China's approach, or say Russia's approach to development assistance?
You know, I heard a little bit of the speaker this morning, and I thought she did a great job of just giving an overlay of what the differences are between US and China's approach. We have experienced this in a couple of different places where we've worked. So MCC doesn't just work in Africa. We've worked in South Asia. We've worked a little bit in the Latin America and the Caribbean. And we are also in Eastern Europe and working in Kosovo. And to your question on strategic competition, whether it's China or Russia, I think it's very clear that our approach and the US approach is partnership. And so that's the very first thing. And at the core of that, MCC has always had country ownership as a core part of its model. So really understanding what a country needs, figuring out how we can help them achieve that based on, evidence-based policy, decision-making that comes from data, and really digging into where we think we can have an impact, like I said, that is transformative, not just making an impact just for the heck of it, but like really something that will be transformative for the economic development. And I think, one of the things I tried to stress in my remarks is that MCC gives grants. If you pass that scorecard and you are able to achieve eligibility and you are able to get this 5-year compact or a threshold program, it is money that is going to you. You've earned it. We've worked together as partners to be able to administer it and implement it in a way that we grow over the 5 years as a partner. And so we've found from a number of partners that we've worked with how much they appreciate that because at the end of the project, you've got a bridge. That bridge is opening up trade. You're not worrying about paying back a loan. You're not worrying about what you might owe back to a government. You have earned that. You've kept the eligibility, and you've been able to acquire something of an infrastructure project that allows you to keep that. I think the other thing that we have for partners who haven't been able to maybe be eligible is the consideration of MCC's work allowing you to strive for stronger democracy and better deliverables for your people. We have a number of countries who know they are not going to be eligible for a MCC compact anytime soon. We call it the MCC effect. It's the aspiration and it's the optimism that one day I will get an MCC compact. And so to that end, we've had countries like DRC, countries that have been awarded compacts like Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone who started 10 years ago putting into their governments teams of people that are allowing them to turn reforms in their government so that they will be eligible to pass the scorecard. And so we love the MCC effect as a cheap way, I don't know, let's say cheap way, but it's a free way of understanding how you can improve your democracy by just striving for trying to get these grant dollars for a compact. I think MCC programs also and their investments reinforce the principles of quality, sustainability, and value for the money. I mean, without MCC compacts, I think a number of countries may not have been able to unlock just one element of economic growth that we've seen be sustainable over the years. And if we want to talk about the difference between what the US brings and what China brings, the partnership and the process of actually standing up an MCC compact requires you to stand up what we call a Millennium Challenge Accountable Entity, or an MCA, which allows a CEO to be named, a deputy CEO to be named, at the local level. So there is an entire team of local people we are building technical capacity on how to manage a project, how to manage the funds that come in, because they don't go to the government, they come through this accountable entity, how to do monitoring and evaluation, and also be accountable for it at the end of the day. So in short, it's not transactional, it is a partnership.
Thank you. So I want to, you mentioned the scorecard again, so I want to come back to the countries that MCC works with. And you've very you clearly said today that governance is really at the heart of what MCC does or who it's working with, and it only chooses well-governed countries for its investments.
Yeah.
So, but you also talked about, we could do more with more. So does reforming the candidate pool so that you can work with more countries run the risk of lowering the standards for partnership? I mean, is there a chance that to get more of these countries working with the MCC, you're going to have to lower your standards?
Interesting. I think we've heard that as we've fought for the legislation. But I think on the contrary, MCC is seeking to increase the range of countries to which it applies our rigorous selectivity model. And I think it gets to maybe something that you said a little bit earlier about democracy backsliding, and we've seen some challenges to that around the world. So how do we get more countries interested in following this model? I think that's part of the impetus behind us wanting to do the country candidate legislation and to expand who we work with. I think we're also hoping to expand our candidate pool to include lower middle income countries with demonstrated need. I think the good governance eligibility criteria still remains at the core of our approach, and so ensuring partnerships only with well-governed countries will remain a standard part of our process. I think the MCC scorecards assess the countries on the 20 different metrics of good governance and compare them to their income peers, which I think will give a few more countries the opportunity to be able to be eligible for a compact, whereas they may not have been able to be eligible for grant-type development assistance in the past. And one of the places that I think about is Guyana. We worked with Guyana very early on in MCC's years, and they still have a lot of challenges, I think, when it comes to economic growth and reducing poverty, and you'll hear the president of Guyana say that as well. But the World Bank Index has showed that Guyana has oil off of its shores. And so they went from being a low to middle income country to all of a sudden being expected to be a high income country. And all of a sudden that didn't change anything as far as institutional reforms, capacity, and ability to be able to look at the policies that are in place to be able to take on this newfound interest from the world. And so we would love to be able to work with countries like Guyana, or even work that we've done previously like in El Salvador. The Western Hemisphere, I think, is really ripe for our ability to be able to engage. There are a number of issues there that on a policy and institutional reform perspective, corruption, fighting some of those issues and revamping policies could benefit from MCC work.
So a lot has changed in your last 20 years not your last 20 years with the MCC, the last 20 years of the MCC. We've got great power competition. We've been talking about that, the growing importance of climate change. We've seen digital infrastructure become a critical part of national infrastructure. That's just a couple examples. So, recognizing that this is a huge question, I think I've been doing that a lot to you today, so thank you for your patience.
Well, just so you know, the note cards are to make sure that I get her question correct. So I was like, I have to reread the question after it's been said.
Question in 5 parts with 3 subparts. So again, I know it's a big question, but how have these evolving, or maybe devolving, challenges, but really specifically, if you can talk about 2 very different ones, climate change, right, adaptation, resilience, and digital infrastructure, how have those particular challenges, and of course if you want to have some more broad conclusions about evolving challenges, how have those challenges changed, or have they changed, where the MCC works and how it works?
So similar to the gender and social inclusion strategy, MCC developed a climate strategy a few years ago that is part of our strategic capstone in our year in review. Because I think, as you mentioned, we have been contending with our ability to be able to meet the needs of what we're hearing from our partners, and they're dealing with, as we mentioned, the exogenous shocks of what climate can do to food insecurity or their agriculture. And so we've really made sure that we have tried to make sure that every program that we do, whether compact or threshold, takes into consideration climate considerations as well. I think the global phenomenon will not change how or where we work at the core of it. As long as there's a need and a proven commitment to democratic values, we're open to engaging. And that may look like climate change in one era, it might look like climate resiliency in one era. We want to make sure that we're being responsive to our partners, and so we're preparing for that. I think in terms of what we're committed to supporting for our partners, Implementing development programs that deliver for their people will continue to stay the core. Poverty and economic growth are tied to climate resilience, and so the ability to be able to help people where they need to be helped is going to require us to make sure that it's inclusive of our model. And so we'll continue to invest in smart activities. This year alone, I think we were able to invest, actually over our 20 years, I think we've been able to invest nearly $1.5 billion in climate smart activities, and we continue to invest in new programs with an approach that integrates climate considerations. Quickly turning to digital, I don't think we can talk about the 21st century and where things are going to go without thinking about how we're no longer only required to be knowledgeable about brick and mortar infrastructure, but we have to contend with the age of technology. And so we have programs that we have been able to administer. Our DigiFem program in Cote d'Ivoire is a great example of how we've been able to include women and youth, but also teaching them digital skills, providing digital literacy and digital education to be able to contend with the jobs that are coming in the 21st century. As I noted before, Africa's population is going to be growing, but also that knowledge and skill set needs to adapt to be able to meet, as I said, the jobs of the 21st century. And I don't think anybody could not contend that they are in the technology field, they're in the digital field. Similarly, I think there is a need to be able to understand where there are challenges with digital infrastructure, and we're seeing misinformation, disinformation, and AI play a very big role in how countries are going to be able to absorb information, and that interconnectivity that information sharing through the digital age is bringing us is going to mean that the results and the types of projects and programs that we put out from MCC will need to be able to be responsive to our partners. And so it's a short answer of saying we are thinking about it on a regular basis. It is a component of every program and project that we do. As I just came from the Tanzania meeting, we were just talking about the digitization of trade on a port and what that might look like and how we could use software to be able to help those programs. So definitely a core part of where we're thinking about the future.
Thank you. Well, I'm getting the "you should have wrapped up by now" signal. Thank you all for joining for today's keynote and conversation. And please join me in thanking Chidi Blyden for her time, insights, and service.